Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Take a walk with me. Now, history doesn't shout at first. It whispers. And sometimes, if we listen carefully, it offers us guidance before it offers us consequence. Today, I want to walk in two directions at once. First direction towards hope, and the second direction towards realism. Because the West has survived before only when it held both together. In our first direction, the first pathway of our walk today, I think about Reverend Jesse Jackson, recently departed, now with the ancestors. And I hear his voice, keep hope alive. 3 words, not sentimental, strategic. Hope is not naive. Hope is disciplined. It's disciplined optimism in the face of gathering storms. Let's recall Munich 1938 again. It taught or should have taught the world something we thought we had learned. That when fear rises, minorities are blamed. When economies strain, identity hardens. When institutions weaken, the vulnerable always suffer first. Munich is remembered for appeasement, but it was also a humanitarian failure. Refugees were turned away. Civilizational rhetoric replaced constitutional restraint. Compassion narrowed before borders closed. And once dehumanization became normalized, violence accelerated. After 1945, leaders believed they had learned the lesson. Never again, they exclaimed. Not simply never again to aggression, but never again to indifference. Humanitarianism was embedded into architecture. The Marshall Plan, United Nations agencies, the Geneva Conventions, collective security designed to prevent catastrophe before it metastasized. Reverend Jackson lived inside that moral inheritance. He walked into conflict zones. He negotiated hostages' releases, spoke across divides. He believed humanitarian engagement was not weakness. It was leverage. It was presence. It was legitimacy. Today, we live in a hardened era. Great power competition intensifies. Defense budgets rise. Authoritarianism resurges. Hypernationalism reappears. Alliances recalibrate. And humanitarian budgets shrink. There and back again. We tell ourselves security must come first. But history reminds us, when famine spreads, extremism recruits. When refugees move, politics radicalizes. When pandemics surge, supply chains fracture. Humanitarianism is not charity. It is prevention. It is upstream security. I imagine walking beside Reverend Jackson and asking, is hope still alive? And I imagine him smiling and saying, hope is alive wherever dignity is defended, where majority power is restrained, where minorities are not conditional, where mercy remains strategic. If we forget the humanitarian lesson of the 1930s, if we treat compassion as expendable, we go back again, back to futures we once rejected. Hope must be deliberate. Policy, funding, presence, courage. Western legitimacy is not measured only in missiles. It is measured in mercy. That was one lesson learned and institutionalized. The question now is whether we retain it. Now, walk with me a little further and down this second pathway of a different direction. I now imagine I'm walking beside E.H. Carr, historian, diplomat, reluctant realist. In 1939, just before catastrophe, he published a book, The 20 Years Crisis. He was not celebrating power politics. He was warning against illusion. The interwar order, he argued, had failed because moral aspiration was divorced from power reality. Idealists believed law alone would preserve peace. Realists believed power alone would secure stability. Carr warned, both extremes are dangerous. Morality without enforcement collapses. Power without restraint corrodes. The warning was offered when there was still time, but it was not heeded. Then, after the war, Carr wrote another book, Nationalism and After. He did not condemn nationalism outright. He understood its emancipatory force, but he warned, when nationalism becomes absolute, when identity overrides institutional compromise, equilibrium fractures. When states define themselves primarily in civilizational opposition, cooperation narrows. Conflict hardens. These were anticipatory lessons, given before catastrophe fully unfolded. Now consider our present moment. Economic decoupling accelerates. Political polarization deepens. Civilizational language returns. Institutional trust thins. Davos warns of fragmentation. Munich debates identity. Alliance rhetoric begins to shift. Carr would ask us, is power embedded in restraint? Is nationalism embedded in institution? Is competition moderated by procedure? Or are we drifting towards hardened blocks in a compound system? The 1930s were not inevitable. They were cumulative. Misrecognition, institutional thinning, national pride unmoored from compromise. After 1945, the West attempted to correct course. Nationalism was embedded within multilateral institutions. Power was linked to procedure. Sovereignty was bounded by law. And for 75 years, that architecture moderated great power conflict. Now, the architecture strains. It hasn't collapsed, but it is straining. Carr's lesson is not pessimism. It's about balance. Hope without realism becomes illusion. Realism without hope becomes cynicism. The West survived before because it combined both. Moral commitment to minority protection, structural embedding of power in institutions, humanitarian engagement, and sober recognition of power realities. History can be illustrative. It can even be saving grace, but only if we listen. The 1930s whispered before they roared. Warnings were written, speeches were delivered, books were published. The cost of ignoring them was measured in tens of millions of lives. Today, the whisper is different, but it exists. Will we embed nationalism within law or elevate it above law? Will we sustain humanitarian legitimacy or treat it as expendable? We balance power and principle, or sever them again. Walk a little further. Hope is still alive, but only if it is anchored in realism. And realism is stabilizing, but only if it is anchored in restraint. There and back again. The future is not predetermined, but the lessons are available. History rarely punishes those who observe carefully. It often punishes those who dismiss quietly. The mid-2020s may be another hinge. The question is whether we choose to listen.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.